Thank you, Keswan. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here, to be part of this dialogue during this exhibition. Thanks to M.V. Narayan and Haridas for all the planning which led me to come here today. It's really, it's a very special occasion for me to come to Thrissur, of course. I know of all these, with Kesavan and others, we've been coming to ITFOC for many years. And it's really wonderful to see the kind of serious engagement with topics which other parts in India is going to find more difficult to engage with. So I'm really pleased to be part of this event today. I also must apologize for speaking in English. I wish I could speak in Malayalam as well as many of you could. But I want to, sometimes when people think we are going to talk about philosophy, etc., the ideas seem to be so difficult. People might be wondering, what is this thing you're really going to talk about? So when I thought of, when Narayan called me and I spoke to him about this and I had a rough idea of what the exhibition was, I thought of the title as Memory and Hope without actually knowing what was the full content of it. I hadn't seen the exhibition. And the reason actually I thought of the title of Memory and Hope is because with my own work on Gandhian organizations for many years, this is a question which repeatedly came back to me. What is it that we can hope? What can I hope for? Which is a very famous question which Kant poses in his own understanding of the three famous questions for his philosophy. What can I hope? What can we hope? What can we as a collective hope? And what does memory have to do with it? And I speak of this in the context particularly of looking at studying various Gandhian organizations. So, but then, there is a lot one can talk on memory and hope, but to me the fundamental problem of memory and hope lies in our understanding of time, the idea of past and future. Because we think of memory as something to do with the past and hope as something to do with the future. But unless we have an idea of the kind of assumptions we have about past and future, these terms really don't make much meaning to us. And part of the political problem of not operationalizing hope, of not converting hope into meaningful action, is also because of the fact that we have not understood the meanings of past and future in various other possibilities, other ways. So when I came, I wanted to see the exhibition before doing this talk, and I'm very happy I met Sudesh and Gopi Krishnan, who were there and who I went around with them. And the first thing as I entered, in their note on the exhibition, the last line of that note ends with this. This is the note which they have written in the exhibition. This journey of their exhibition, taking so many photographs, this journey has filled us with hope. And hope transcends time and space. So I said, oh, that's wonderful, because it makes what I want to say a little more meaningful to what the exhibition is actually doing. Because when I was talking to them and when they went around all the places where Gandhi visited during the last few months of his life, during the most terrible times of our country, during this extreme violence in Noakhali and Bihar, and when they go back in search of the remnants of Gandhi in those places, what did they find? In many places they found absence, nothing was there. In what sense then is Gandhi a memory? How is Gandhi present in those places, including Noakhali and in this things in Bihar which happened? How is Gandhi there? What is our memory of Gandhi? And I thought a lot of the exhibition was actually struggling about that. There's a wonderful story which Sudesh was telling me about in Noakhali. After Gandhi left, he leaves behind Reddipalli Satyanarayana, a person who was staying there, right? And then apparently when he died, and I was remembering, I think Gopi Krishna was also there, he was telling me about it. After he died, he did not want any memorial, any measure of his memory left behind. So there is nothing there. He said, nothing of me should remain as a memory except 3 mounds of sand or mud, right? And that the people keep, whenever it gets washed out, they put 3 mounds of mud or sand. That's all. And in fact, as they were also pointing out, many Gandhian scholars haven't even heard of Satyanarayana, but who has played such an important role in continuing the memory of Gandhi in Novakali. And even though his memory is not present in the way in which we have understood Gandhism today, in India particularly, it still remains a very important beacon of hope. This is very interesting, this connection between memory and hope. That's what I had wanted to think about. And when I saw this in the exhibition, it really struck me that, this is really what I was struggling with, what I wanted to talk about. So I'm really glad that I've had this opportunity to be here with you to do this. The first point, of course, which people have been saying outside, away from the exhibition for a long time, which is, what is Gandhi really? Who is Gandhi really today for us? We know of Gandhi, the historical figure. Some people may call him father of nations, some people may not like to call him that, whatever else it is, that we know of something called Gandhi. But how does Gandhi become relevant to us? It is difficult to talk about Gandhi because there are various points which we may disagree with. There are questions of caste which we may have to engage with Gandhi more seriously, questions of religion, and even questions of what constitutes ahimsa, non-violence, and so on. But yet, your capacity to exhibit those moments of Gandhi in front of us today, in the present, is actually a statement of hope. It's not of memory at all. What we have in the exhibition is not a memory of Gandhi. It is a production of a kind of hope. Whatever hope, in a sense, which these Gopi Krishnan, Sudesh and the others who are involved with this, whatever sense of hope they had. But it is, what we are seeing is not photograph of some Gandhi at some point, how he looked, what he did, but producing a notion of hope in that. And in all my engagement with Gandhian organizations, this is a very constant theme. For example, one of the groups I had studied much earlier, 20 years back, was the Gandhigram Trust in Dindukkal in Tamil Nadu. And when we first went there to engage with them on various things, because I have one of my very close friends and colleagues, Samir Banerjee, is a very well-known Gandhian, is a very good Gandhian scholar, he's written very important books on Gandhi, and he was also an activist. For many years he's been with all the various Gandhian groups in Bihar, with Kadigram, Acharya Ramurthy, then in Varda, and in other places. So we had gone with him to try and make sense of what is the kind of social interaction between Gandhian organization and the society. And there are very dedicated people in these organizations. But one thing we immediately discovered was this, that there is a great imbalance. There is a great imbalance between what Gandhians think they are doing for society and what society thinks they are doing for them. And this was a very interesting thing. These are very committed Gandhians. They've been working with the communities in Tamil Nadu, for example. And then when it came to the support of this community to the Gandhian scholars, they found that it was very lukewarm. In fact, when the DMK and the ADMK government came in with certain schemes, they moved, like for example, the self-help schemes, they moved immediately to them rather than to the Gandhian organizations. And Samir recounts a very important example of Acharya Ramurthy, one of the Gandhigram in Bihar, one of the most important Gandhian organizations. And he quotes him in one of the documentary he makes, when he says, Acharya Ramurthy, such a dedicated Gandhian all his life, he said that the problem with Gandhism, if you like, was the fact that all of us thought even our children will sacrifice our lives in order to practice this kind of social action. He said we didn't understand how to take Gandhism beyond and how to reach it to the youngsters so that they too would feel like they wanted to be part of this. And that became a larger problem with all Gandhian organizations across India, where it's only the people who were very involved, young people who are involved in Gandhism, grew old, and they grew very old, and it was never replaced by the younger people coming in to do it. And that shift made a major difference to many of these organizations. Many of them did not flourish, and so on. But in every whatever kinds of circumstances they were, there was one thing which characterized all of them, which was a great sense of hope. I remember one of the most important, inspiring visits to a Gandhian organization for me was in Lakshmi Ashram, which is a school in Almoda district, above Nainital. And I'd gone with Samir and we spent a week there. And this is a girls' school, and it's up in the mountains. And it's really remarkable story. Gandhi has visited there, and Lakshmi Ben was set it up, and they are running that school. It's largely for poorer girl children. And the day I went there, the girls live, the school, the bedroom, the classroom, everything is the same. They work there, they eat there, they have to be part of the cooking, they go and do some agriculture work, they take care of all other kinds of buying, walking down the hill, bringing up groceries and so on. And there was one group of people, the 12th standard children were not there in the class at that time. And then the principal was telling us the 12th standard children had gone on a padayatra against alcohol consumption in many of the villages, which was a major problem they were all facing. So when we were there, they had all finished their padayatra and came back after 3 or 4 days. And all of them, they came and recounted what their experience was as 12 standard, 15, 17, 18-year-old girls going around all the villages up in the hills in Uttaranchal, going around Uttarakhand and coming back and seeing it as part of their learning. So I know many schools, for example, which have really tried to work with Nai Talim. And Nai Talim, I think, has very important insights into the nature of education, how we could conceive of education. It's also, there have been influences of that in other systems. And Nai Talim has been very difficult because for various reasons. Here was a classic example of how a model of education seemed to work within this community of girl children who had no other access to education. So the only thing which characterizes them, when those girls who came from very poor families, some of whom are orphaned, etc., was repeatedly this story and narrative of hope. And Gandhi there was not a memory at all. It's not that they were doing something about Gandhi. Gandhi is not somebody who is, it's not the Gandhi, it's not a Gandhi with even such caricatures, such images, right? It is Gandhi in a very different manner. So this question which should come to us is very simple. What kind of a memory can we have of Gandhi? What is it that we can remember of Gandhi? Is it Gandhi the man who had his own particular very different kinds of difficult tendencies? Is Gandhi as a father? Is Gandhi as a father of the nation or father of his family? Gandhi's relationship with women, Gandhi's relationship with other religions, with the Dalits, whom he called as Harijans and so on. How does one really make sense of what is our memory of Gandhi? And within this is a very important question, because for many people who think of memory, the idea of memory itself is a bit of a problem, and that's where the first problem begins with. Our idea of memory is a problem because we don't trust our memories. In many philosophical traditions, memory is not seen as a valid means of knowing. There are exceptions like the Jainas, very interesting arguments for why memory, but none of us will actually accept memory as a valid means of knowing. What do I mean by that? For example, if I am seeing, perception is a valid means that I am seeing Keshavan in front of me, I believe he is there. But memory is very odd as a term, if you think about it. What can I accept as absolutely true about memory? Suppose I say I remember something, is it as clear and indubitable? Is it as clear and unchallengeable as my seeing him sitting here? Now, some philosophers would say my seeing him here itself is questionable, but if you remove those skeptics away from our discussion, you would still say we have a problem with memory. Why? Because one, we don't know what memory is really referring to. In fact, our own memories are often shades of things which have happened. It's very difficult. If you go back and try and recollect what is it that you actually remember? It's not necessarily what the state of things were. It does not capture the sense of truth like perhaps other forms of sensations have. So there is always a bit of a suspicion about, can I trust my memory? The second problem is the fact that memory is often reconstructed by us. It's not that memory is stored like a picture. We like this image. Some people would think of memory as, for example, tomorrow when I go back to Bangalore, I'll have a memory of this event, and it might seem that I might have a picture of this event. My memory of the event tomorrow will not be like the picture. I will not know what color shirt somebody in the back is wearing, which I can if I take a photograph and look at it. Memory has this very odd function of choosing what to remember. Therefore, the suspicion about memory is, what do we construct out of what we experienced? So if memory is something that we experienced, right, it comes from something we experienced, then the problem with trusting memory is because memory could have modified that experience and stored it in a particular manner in our heads. This is the fundamental problem about memory. That you do not think that we can trust memory to have captured the reality of whatever it experienced, because we tend to choose what we remember. And that's why, if you look at our most basic cognitive function, we may tend to remember things which are more traumatic. And you may tend to remember certain events where people have said something harsh to you. You may tend to remember it in a particular manner. You will, when you remember, let's say, a traumatic event, you will not remember everything of the traumatic event. You will not remember the event in its fullness. You will only remember elements of it. So this question about this larger suspicion about memory is related to all of this. But most importantly, memory is fundamental. The confusion about memory reflects a fundamental confusion about time. Now you might say, why from such a grounded person like Gandhi, who was very deeply involved in social activities and social change, one wants to bring in all these very complicated ideas called time and memory. But I want to try and show to you that unless we engage with these fundamental conceptual confusion we have about the idea of time, the idea of past and future, even the words like memory and hope may not yield much fruits to us. We may tend to use them very casually in a very psychological manner, like some particular psychological state of my mind. But our real engagement with questions of memory and hope have to necessarily engage with this particular problem of time. And this problem of time is something which I am sure you have thought about. Whether we do philosophy or not, it does not matter, because this is such an important question we often talk about, which is the problem of the past. Because memory seems to be a record of the past. That's very clear. I don't have a memory of the future, because I haven't yet encountered it. In fact, as one of the concluding things which I wanted to say, which Keshavan's already at one go, he declared it when I was sitting outside with him. He said, hope is the memory of the future. In a sense, you could, which is what I want to come to considering the idea of hope as memory of the future. But the basic question is, we have memory only of what has happened, not what is going to come. So memory and past and time are very closely linked. So it is because memory is about the past. Memory is about the past, but so is history. What we think as one of the most contentious problems in India today is history. Sudesh was telling me when we were walking through this exhibition, we were actually looking at this question, and when they were explaining, when they went to the museum and they were trying to find records, for example, in the Red Fort, when they had the court hearing of Nathuram Godse's trial, he says, the people there, none of them knew about it. So they went and asked them, which room did the trial take place? And they said, the people who are working there said, they don't know. And then they said a very interesting thing. They went to the hotel, right? Please correct me, Gopi Krishnan, wherever. They went to a hotel where Godse was there the previous day, and apparently in the trial, it's a lovely story, so I can share them this here. Apparently in the trial, they knew that they tracked his movements in the trial because he liked a glass of whiskey, so there's a bar in that hotel. So he went and paid for it, and that was presented as evidence in the trial. And what Sudesh was telling me was that it is the bartender who told them all the story about what happened in Red Fort, what happened to the whole court and case and so on. So memory plays it's very interesting. There are people who will not want to remember certain things. And I think one of the things which this exhibition is highlighting to us is, what do you do when you are not allowed to remember certain things? Why is it that you do not want to remember the people who were charged in Gandhi's murder? Right? And it is there. They have put it up there now. Now we can go take a photograph and it's there in records, but it is not available in various places. People don't talk about it because that memory has been restructured. Erasure is just one restructuring. The fact that you remove it out of our textbooks, of our collective consciousness. So memory has this very strong political function too. And that is the struggle of history, right? History and memory both have this problem. And both have this problem about what they are talking about. History wants to talk about the past as if the past was there and past was in a particular manner. And memory also wants to talk about the past. But then memories do not constitute histories. The whole development of the idea of history as a discipline, as a quote-unquote scientific discipline, was to not depend upon memory for history. That's why oral histories, which are primarily based on memories, produce a different kind of histories than written histories. Because what we are told in history is that for history to be valid, you have to have evidence for that particular past. So if you go look back at this question of what is the idea of time and here past and history, you'll actually understand many of the confusions which they have with history. So what I'm trying to say is that, one, that to understand this collective memorization of Gandhi, the collective production of some memories of various people, whether it's Gandhi or Ambedkar or anybody else, there is a certain kind of a political process which happens. Okay? Now, the first mistake people tend to do when we talk about memory is to think of memory in a very simplistic manner, that memory is just remembering or something like that. But cognitive scientists who have been working a lot on memory, trying to understand the nature of memory, actually point out that there are different types of memory. So I'm saying this not to tell you about the literature on memory, but to ask a simple question. What kind of a memory of Gandhi do we want? Because there are different types of memories. Just to give you an example, just to show you the range of the ways of thinking about memory, there are things which are called short-term memory and long-term memory, which I'm sure many of us know. Short-term memory, you may remember something which happened just 5 minutes back. Long-term memory are things which you may remember what happened so-called 10 years back or whatever, long time back. But even within this long-term memory, there are different types of memory. For example, there is something which is called explicit memory, which is memories which you consciously and intentionally can recall. That is, we have capacity to retrieve them. And this is again a very fascinating question. Where are your memories stored? How can you retrieve them? How are they stored? And how do you trust what has been stored? Okay, that's the larger problem memory, right? So we have the capacity to recall something very specifically, exactly like when I went to the canteen here in the next building, I remembered all my ITFOC days when I used to come there and sitting in the same canteen and having the tea, which has not changed its taste in all these years. So the point is that's a very explicit kind of a memory which I can verbalize. There are also a different type of memories called episodic memories, which arise because of certain kinds of personal experience. We remember, and we don't remember full episodes, we only remember parts. Everything which you think you remember, if you pay attention to it and ask, what exactly do you remember? What exactly can you verbalize? What exactly happened? Like if I remember that ITFOC canteen, If you ask me who were all the people who are sitting next to you, I may not remember. What exactly did you have that day to eat? I may not fully remember, I may partly remember. So our memory is always doing this. So episodic memories are these personal memories. Then there is a different type of memory called semantic memory, which is remembering facts, what happened on what year, what we do in our classrooms and so on. And there is another type of memory which is very important in the context of what I want to say. That's called procedural memory. Procedural memory is our memory of how to do certain things. If I'm going to play chess or football, I know I already have memory of certain kinds of things that I have to do. And that's a very different kind of memory. Okay, so all these things are there. The question therefore is, when we say we remember Gandhi, what kind of remembrance is it? Is it episodic for those who may have met Gandhi? Is it what is called semantic memory? That is remembering facts about him. I remember so many facts about his Quit India movement and independence thing and what he said here, what he solved Satyagraha, etc. That is one type of memory. But what I want to point out here is what this exhibition does and what we need to do today with Gandhi is to ask ourselves which way should I remember Gandhi by? And here we need to do something which cognitive scientists may not be very keen on doing when they analyze memory in this manner, which is this very important point. For me, I think that's the point I'm really working towards, which is the fact that we have something called a collective memory or social memory. That collective memory is something which is very different from my personal memories of what happened to me. How is it that all of us, so today for example, all of us here have a collective memory that such a talk happened, that somebody was sitting here and this is what we talked about. We may not remember all the exact details. You may even forget my name in 2 days. But you can still say, there is some talk on some memory, some Gandhi, etc. Some collective memory is present. Collective memory is as confused as personal memory. Because each of you may have a different memory of what happened today. But yet, we will have something which is common among all of us. Collective and social, so a society is defined by the way a community produces memory. And the production of memory is very important for sociality, for coming together as a community. Sociologists often point out that whenever there is a community, a social community, they produce what is called a Puranas. They produce a story. Anthropologists call the myth of these, the origin myth of communities. Whether it's aboriginals or the Adivasis or urban communities or even very dominant communities. My friend Gopal Guru was telling me about how in Pune, the Chitpavan Brahmins and others were now reconstructing a Puranic memory of some kind of a story of this warrior king and all that story which you know about. So the question here is that this production of memory is what may produce a society, it may produce a community. And therefore the question is, how do we as a community produce a collective memory? What kind of a collective memory can we produce? And therefore, when I ask, how do we remember Gandhi? I'm asking a more collective memory. How do all of us, for those of whom, for example, the people who did this exhibition, for whom Gandhi is such an important figure of hope in the way they have expressed it, what is their collective imagination of Gandhi? And when we ask this question, there is another very interesting idea of memory, which I think is very useful in this context, which is what I've called as, an enactive memory. An enactive memory should remind you a lot about theatre. A theatre is an enactment. You enact something. And when you look at Gandhi, for example, as a figure, if you ask what is it that you want to remember about Gandhi, not where he was born, what he did, etc., but how he acted. So to remember Gandhi in the explicit memory, what is called semantic memory, I could remember all the dates about him, etc. He went to South Africa, came back, etc. That's one type of memory. But to remember Gandhi as an inactive memory is to be learned to memorize the way he acted. In fact, this is a very interesting question, given all the so-called conflicts between Ambedkar and Gandhi. A very important point for both of them was about the question of truth as action. It's something which Gopal Guru has written very nicely about in trying to understand how Ambedkar and Gandhi's idea of truth really comes from. So this inactive memory is something which makes the memory of Gandhi not as a frozen picture, but as somebody who is actually walking. And Kesavan looked at it, he said, look at this picture, it's so dynamic, right? It's like almost running and walking. So the question about inactive memory is, how does memory happen within us that makes Gandhi an agent of action, not as somebody who said something. So we remember people by saying what they said, what they think, etc. Maybe even what they did. But to remember them by acting the way they did is a completely different type of memory. And the production of hope, the possibility of hope, lies in the possibility of enacting Gandhi. Because we can all sit and say nice things about Gandhi or bad things about Gandhi, it doesn't matter. We can critique him, praise him, etc. But the real challenge is, how do we perform like he does when faced with the conflicts of society? When faced with what he faces, which the exhibition is about, Noakhali and Bihar, in the worst types of violence, the worst kind of anger and hatred, for him to be able to stand there and meet those people and tell Hindus and Muslims that they have to learn to accept each other. That enactment is the memory of Gandhi that I would say this exhibition is making us ask. In other words, to remember Gandhi, not even his great posture and his spectacles, is to ask myself, can I act even a little bit like that in the face of violence and hate? Can I stand up and act in that particular manner? Now, so therefore, exhibitions of Gandhi, which there are many, can produce different types of memories. So they can produce memories which can be about information about him, etc., etc. But an exhibition which wants to look at how you can enact Gandhi in your life is a very different kind of a performance. And I'm trying to understand the shift from memory to hope, because this is an exhibition which begins with memories of Gandhi's walk, the last few months of his life, and ends with the hope of hope. That's all they want to do. As they themselves explicitly say, they want to look at the hope for the future. Now, so this is a very important question, and that's why hope itself is a memory of a future in some sense. Because you want to look at hope. Hope is also a very interesting philosophical term, and not many philosophers have actually dealt too deeply with it, although in spite of Kant's so-called fundamental question about hope, part of it is because there are many other connotations, so other meanings to hope, which have not as positive, in a very positive way. For example, some wishful thinking is also called as hope. Dreams are also called as hope. I may just be dreaming that, maybe I may get a job, but I may not. I may have a wishful thinking. I may be daydreaming, which may also be mistaken for hope. But hope is a very specific kind of we'll have to think about whether it's belief, etc. But from what I want to say is, hope has a very specific relationship to the idea of future. If memory has a specific idea of the relationship to the past, then hope has a specific relationship to the idea of future. So whenever we talk about memory and hope, we are basically talking about what seems to have passed us by and what we hope will come in the future. And here is where the fundamental question about poetry, about time, it really comes in. And unless you engage with this question and these problems of time, because it's the problems of time which become the problems of memory and hope. And we can look at time in various ways. And I want to make a small detour into that, just to, collectively think about time and leave that with you, because without trying to make it sound very, serious and so on, because time is a very fascinating thing to think about anyway. So, if you talk about past and future, we are actually basically saying something about the nature of time. But what is that nature of time that we're actually talking about? Our most common conception of time, especially of the past, is in terms of clock time. Everything that we talk about in the past, Gandhi, India got independence in 1947. Gandhi was born in 1869. Some whatever that war of independence was fought in 1857. Whatever, So you can have, all these kinds of stories about time, about the past, and these are all linear. So all of our historical usage of time is that it is linear. Something happened in 1500, then 1553, 1625, 1735, whatever. All these years seem to mark some places in a line of time. Okay, so past is actually imagined as something which has happened before. 1900s is a particular place in time. 1800 is another place in time. And history wants to go reach them, just like I want to go reach from, Thrissur, I want to go to Kochi, and from Kochi to Trivandrum, etc. It's almost like, just like if I go in this direction, I'm going to go to Kochi, and from there I can go to Trivandrum. Similarly, we talk about time as if you go backwards, you will come to 1950, then 1900, then 1850, 1800, and so on. That conception of time that we very often have internalized so deeply within our modern life is one that is based on this linear dimension of measured time. But measured time is not real at all. There is nothing real about the time that you see in the clock, or saying that there is something in nine. It is a convention. Convention we use for some particular purpose. Okay? Now, that is what we would call as a measurable scientific time. But there is also, for a whole generation across cultures, the struggle about understanding time, while it has been one part of it within the so-called scientific domain of measurement, okay, because the idea of science is nothing more than measurability. Any concept in science is possible as long as they are measurable. So time too becomes scientific when you can measure it. Although we don't know what we are measuring, okay, but it's measurable. Whereas, why I called in my title the Poetics of Time is because one of the most interesting struggles of human thought over time across cultures has been this struggle of finding other voices of time, other understandings of time, including the most interesting question which many of you can yourself ask, and I'm sure you have better answers than I can, which is to ask yourself, what is your experience of time? How do you experience time? If suppose there is something sweet and I eat it and I can experience a sweet taste, and you know what it is. Or if I touch something hot, I know what it is because I can experience it. But if we invest so much on the idea of time in our history and the past and future, what is our own experience of time? How does time appear to you? How does time touch you? How does time enter you? Now this question, which leads us to look at the sense of time, especially when you talk of memory and hope, in terms of what I had called as a poetics of time. And the poetics of time is a way of, there's a lot one can talk about, because there's a lot of attempts by various writers and poets who talk about time in very different manner. One of my favorite ones, and I'll just quote it here because, I think it says a lot. I'm sure you can discuss a lot about this. It's by T.S. Eliot. And T.S. Eliot, as I'm sure all of you know and must enjoy, not only a great poet, a Nobel-winning poet, but also somebody who was also trained in philosophy. And I think his struggle with the question of time in many of his poems, actually you could say reflect some larger questions about what time is. And in the 4 quartets, in the first quartet, he begins with very famous lines, which I'm sure many of you may have probably taught in classrooms, when he says, "Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future. and time future contained in time past. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. And then the question of memory comes, follows it, etc. What Eliot is trying to point out here is that we have ordered our lives, and this is why we have to ask the question, what is time? Because our daily functions are based on a particular belief about time. We act as if there is something called the future and something called the past and something called the present. And we act with a lot of ignorance about what these basic terms mean. And when T.S. Eliot is writing this about that the fact that the time which is present and which is time is past are both present in time future, and time future is already contained in time past, he's saying something which one of the greatest philosophical works from Indian philosophical traditions, which is Nagarjuna's Moola Madhyamika Karika, the commentaries on it, will also make a very similar questions about time. When he talks about, is there an essential meaning of time, there are very similar arguments he's talking about, because the larger problem here is, what is this thing called time which seems to have held a grip on us in such an important manner? And when I say grip on us, I include all of us here, because the grip of time that is upon us is a modernist time. It is a capitalist time. It's directly related to capitalism. And that's a very interesting connection, because what has time got to do with capitalism? What has time got to do with the social movement? And how can it hold us in such a grasp that it influences how we live each day? It influences what we call as memory and what we call as hope. One way to understand this is to ask ourselves, where does our basic idea of time come from? You know, our basic idea of time comes from the idea of change. We do not perceive time, but we perceive change. So if I'm standing and if I'm sitting, you know that something has changed. Here I'm standing, here I'm sitting. We invoke the concept of time to make sense of this idea of change. And that's very clear and very obvious, because every idea, the earliest ideas of time, arise when you look at the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. And therefore you will say that there is some change happening, let's say in terms of light to darkness, and that change can be characterized by something called time. So change is the first starting point of any of our conception of time. Today with the clock time, today remember that all our clock times, the clocks we all follow, of which we are such great slaves to, including especially with our digital phones and digital clocks, all of them are still, they are not measuring anything called time. There is nothing called time for our clocks to measure. They are still measuring physical change. Just like the earliest idea of time measured the sun, the light and darkness, today's time measurements are based on some other physical characteristics. For example, the standards of time today are about a particular atomic transition, cesium atom or whatever. But the point is, they're still about, it's a measure of some change of a natural phenomenon, of a natural process. So, if that is the idea of time that happens in the natural, so the changes in natural world define our sense of time. But they cannot capture the sense of change which happens in us. Just to give you a simple point, what I'm trying to say is, your experience of time, your understanding of change which happens within you cannot be captured by clock time. For a clock time, 1990 and 2000 is a 10 years gap. 1980 to 1990 is also 10 years gap. For clock time, they both are the same, 10 years gap, whatever that means. But for our lives, for you, the gap between 1980 to 1990 is not the same gap in your life between 1990 to 2000. Our experience of time has got nothing to do with the clock time. We keep using it to tell ourselves, oh, I was born in 1950, 1960, whatever. You know, we construct a story. I finished school in this year, I got a job here, I did it, etc. But they have nothing to do with that, because our internal experience of time is a measure of our internal changes in life. In other words, just like the sun's moving produces the first idea of time, clock time, so too does changes in yourself produces a sense of time for you. In other words, time is purely a subjective phenomena inside you. Each one of us, our senses of time are very different. It is not the same at all. And that is why, if you ask how do you look at time, the way we look at it in terms of our personal experiences are very, very different. I'm saying this because, very briefly and very quickly, why questions of people like Gandhi really matter in understanding what is the future and the past. But just before saying that, I just want to make a final detour into that. So that I can try and finish in 5-10 minutes, which is to actually point to a very important aspect about time, which many philosophers and cognitive scientists have been looking at for a very long time. And there's a very interesting puzzle about time. Part of our problem in understanding time is that it is captured in the fact that we always tend to talk of time in terms of what are called spatial metaphors. We tend to talk of time in terms of space. We don't have language and vocabulary to talk only of time. We'll say time has passed by. Every way you refer to time is actually about spatial metaphors. So I'll give you some examples. For example, drawing from Gentner's very interesting work on spatial metaphor and temporal reasoning, some of the examples: looking forward to a brighter tomorrow, or troubles that lie behind us. So when I'm saying that, you're saying looking forward to a brighter tomorrow, and I point out like this, what I'm basically saying, ahead of me. It's a spatial term. It's not what is time in there. I'm pointing to ahead of me. And when we say troubles that lie behind us, I'm saying it's behind me, and that's a spatial term. And so since time is so much closely related to memory, and when we say hope, then what kind of the idea of time that we actually are working with? Is it about just a spatial idea? If you look at many of the other examples it's quite remarkable that time, you only talk about it in one-dimensional term, like behind me or in forward of me. You don't use terms like, depth, like shallow or wide, which has more depth in space. So front, back, and before and after are very commonly used for this. And cognitive scientists point out two very interesting things. There are two ways by which we make sense of time. One is called the ego moving metaphor. Ego is the self, the I moving metaphor. And the other is a time moving metaphor. So the I moving metaphor is where when I talk about time, the I moving metaphor is I talk about time as if I am moving towards the future. That everything that I'm doing is moving towards the future. And the time moving metaphor is whereas I'm standing still and the future is coming towards me. So for example, you will say things like, we are fast approaching the holidays. Now when you say we are fast approaching the holidays, it is as if holidays, that is future, is somewhere there. Like when we come to a station, I'm fast approaching Thrissur, is the same as saying I'm fast approaching the holidays, where holidays is a place in time in the future, and I'm approaching it, I'm moving towards it. So many of for example, we must go forward with this plan, etc. And the other time moving metaphors are like the holidays are coming fast. So in one case, I would say we are fast approaching the holidays, as if holidays are some place and we are moving towards it. And the other term which we often use is to say holidays are approaching fast, which means that we are stationary and time is coming towards us. The interesting point here is this. This is not about deep philosophical analysis or conceptual cognitive analysis. It's about our ordinary language. It's about the way we talk about time every day of our ordinary everyday actions. And here is where I think we need to pay attention to the fact that the story of past and future that we are using today is not obvious. It is not true for all human cultures. And this is a really fascinating piece of work, which again, linguists and cognitive scientists have looked at. And I'll just give you some example of their very interesting work, just to indicate to you, to ask us, can you think of past and future different? Which means, can you think of memory and hope in a different manner? This work by cognitive scientists and philosophers is very extensive. There are a lot of work, people like Cooper, Ryder and Nunes, and I just want to point about one work which Nunes and others had done. They were asking this, they were working with the indigenous people in South America, in the Andes, and they were doing this question of asking, how do they talk about past and future? Like we talk about, oh, past was just went behind us and future is ahead of us. How do these people talk about, is it something universal in this? And I think the results are remarkable, and I really think if you think through it, there is a lot I think it will give us, just for us to reflect on our assumptions about time and therefore memory and hope. The interesting point is that the Yupno, one of the tribes in South America, when they talk about time, they don't talk about future in terms of pointing to future. So the point which Nunes begins by is that it is English speakers who talk about the future as ahead and the past as behind. Now this might surprise us. Why should English speakers do that? Right? What does language have to do with how we gesture towards the past and future? And therefore you can ask this question about Malayalam, of course, and I'll see, what you think, how you think about it. When the Yupno talk about understanding time, they do gestures, but they don't talk about for past is always back and future is ahead. What he discovered when they interviewed a lot of these people was that when they point to future, they point to uphill. And when they point to the past, they point to the downhill. Now, this might get really confusing, but for them, that is their life, okay? What does it mean? It means that the reference to our past and presence for us, okay, both as English and Malayalam, on this modernist capitalist economies, past and future is the reference to my body, with reference to our body in the sense, I say past because I walk forward in a particular manner. So for me, future is ahead. I'm walking towards the future. Okay. But for the Yupno, who live in a land filled with hills, their reference to past and future is to the geographical world. Which is, if you ask yourself, where does your idea of past and future come from? Then you will have to take this into account, that for some communities, past and future are defined by how their surroundings are, not how their bodies are. And there are many other examples of this, okay? So I'll give you another example. So for example, Aymara, another language spoken in the Andes. In Aymara, when you say a long time ago, if you use an English phrase like a long time ago, a long time ago, the Aymara use the phrase a lot of time in front. Now, if you think past and future is universal and common to all human beings, this work radically challenges that. It makes us question what our beliefs about past and future are. So when Aymara, when they talk about past and future, when they talk about future, they gesture behind. When they talk about past, they point out to the in front of you. And there's a beautiful explanation for that. I think it makes a lot of sense. Because, think about it. Okay? When I look at all of you, I know what is there in front of me, right? Because I don't know what's behind me. But I know what's in front of me. I know all of you are sitting in front of me. I know what has gone behind me in my past. Past is something I know. Past is in front of me. Future is that which I don't know. Future is obviously behind me. I mean, such a beautiful, simple redescription of past and future in terms of our language and gestures. And I think it makes absolute great sense. I mean, in a very different way, Ricker comes back to this in another context. But this is a very important point about time and language, okay? And more interestingly, what they point out is this, that in the way we look at past and future depends on our language. Not just on our language, on how we write our languages. So for example, in English and many other languages which does this, past is behind, future is in front. Okay, and it is based on the fact that I walk, towards the future. Walking forward is a very bodily motion. In Hebrew, past is rightward, going to the right, and future is going to the left. So when they gesture, so when I'm saying future and past and future, I might do like this. If you're a Hebrew speaker, you will very probably, with all the experiments they have done, you will say, oh, future and past is, oh, this happened. So when I say, oh, that happened yesterday. So in Hebrew, when you're saying that, you may say, oh, that happened yesterday. Showing to your right. And if you want to say about the future, oh, tomorrow I want to go there. In our gestures, we say, tomorrow I want to come there. Instead we say, tomorrow I want to go there. So you might wonder, why you are Hebrew, why just because you speak Hebrew you do this? In Mandarin, the Chinese script, past is above and future is below. So when you refer to past, you refer up, and when you refer to future, you refer below. And what is fascinating about it is because the writing systems are like that. In English, we write from left to right. Hebrew writes from right to left, like in Urdu. Mandarin writes from top to bottom. So when they did this very fascinating experiment, what they did was they took, so there's another indigenous tribe in Australia which always looks at past as the direction east and future as the direction west, because that tracks the sun for them. So in other words, the very idea of past and future is so different based on various cultural assumptions, the way we understand the world around us, the way we understand our body in relation to the world, and the way in which we write. Just because we write English from left to right and Hebrew from right to left, can it change our sense of past and future? So they did a very simple experiment, and this experiment was about giving people 3 stages of bananas. So they take a banana. So a banana is a full banana with that peel is there. Then there's a banana which is partially peeled, and finally a banana which is half eaten. So let's say I give you these 3 things. I give you a banana with the full peel on it. Then there is another banana which is the peel is removed, half peel, and the third banana which is half eaten. And they say, order it. How will we order it? English speakers place the banana which is fully on the peel on the left, then the half peeled, half opened one on the right, next to it on the right, and the half eaten one on the last right. Hebrew speakers put it exactly the opposite. Again, this idea, just such a simple example to show that what we take for assumption about past and future is so much dictated by all these kinds of assumptions and beliefs about our reference. And that's the crucial point, and that's the last point I'll end with. And this is the crucial point for me, because I'm saying all this to ask the question that if our reference to past and future is first in the scientific, measurable, capitalist economies, and I keep saying capitalist because it's a very important form of measuring time and controlling idea which is central to this. If those ideas of time produce a particular past and future, then that belief influences our lives. The fact that we think development, future is about development, we are going to progress towards the future, moving towards that some particular thing, has a very, very specific logic behind it. What are we moving towards? What is that we are moving towards? What is that idea of a future? But as I was pointing out, if the idea of time is always with respect to something else, natural time is with respect to natural phenomena, our individual time is with respect to events which happen in our lives. As we saw with all these indigenous tribes, their sense of time is with very different kinds of engagement with the natural world around them. Then the simple question we have to ask is, what is the reference for social time? What is the reference for our collective time? What is the reference by which we measure the past and future of our societies? Because just like the sun is moving, something is changing, the final point of all this is about societies. We are talking about social change. Where does a society go from its past to the future? What is the reference point that captures the change in societies? So for example, I would definitely say that a feudal society has no sense of social time. There is no social time in a feudal society. You can have individual time, you can have clock time. That's very important actually, because you can measure labor, exploitation is very much built in with that. But you do not have a sense of social time because there is no social change. The society, any static society which does not change, does not allow a sense of time, because all change is with respect to change. And if you do not have a sense of social time, you do not have a sense of past and future, you do not have a sense of memory and hope, you do not have a sense of what you want the society to move towards to. That is the crucial point. That is the reason why these are so centrally important, so essential to the way we understand social change. To me, if you want to have a sense of social time, something which measures how society changes, then you need reference points. Just like the Yupnos need the hill as a reference point. We need a reference point. What is our reference point? It is only these people, like Gandhi, who function as what you could call as singularities in society, which produces a reference by which you can measure change in society. Definitely, if you look at Marx before, definitely Marx becomes a reference point to map change in practices of labor, production, etc. Okay, this you guys know. I'm in Kerala. I won't talk about Marx. Okay? You know about this much more. But Marx is a singularity in a social change, because with that as a reference point, I know what is past and what is future. I know how to measure that change. I have the vocabulary, I have the language for time to measure that change. So it's not like a feudal society. Gandhi is a very important singularity to help us understand a particular form of change related, I would say, fundamentally to questions of non-violence. Ambedkar is an extremely important singularity through which you are able to understand the past and future of caste within a society. To just map, to give you a sense of time. Why a sense of time? Because it is through time that you can map change. It is through time that you can conceive of a future to which you move towards. Savitribai Phule is a singularity. With that particular event of Savitribai Phule, you begin to map the question of girl education. For example, we see this as social phenomena, but how do we understand the social phenomena? They are all actually not just about saying I've changed, we have to get rid of something, which is very correct, but also to produce a sense of time, a collective sense of time within a social, within a society, within a community. It is that production of time which produces memory and hope. If we don't have that, then hope reduces to individuals' desire. I may hope that everybody should have a Benz driving around in. Everybody looks like, people think now development is that everybody has a big car. The only comment I often make when I come to Kerala is that every time I come to Kerala, I'm just astounded that everybody has such big cars and such small roads, of course. So I'm like, that may become a measure of the kind of thing which you think what development is. But the point is, no idea of development, no idea of social change is possible without an underlying theory of time. And an underlying idea of time depends on an underlying idea of change. And those change are always catalyzed by individual, very important moments of historical practice, such as with Gandhi and Ambedkar and Savitribai Phule and so on. And each of them are needed because they are the ones who produce a social sense of time. In other words, our reference for time and therefore of what is future, what is development, etc., are dependent on these kinds of very important figures who have the potential to produce possibilities of change within a society. So I will stop here, and I hope I've not confused you all too much, but it's also a way of giving you a peek into what, on the one hand we have all these very important social movements and the difficulties when we need to think about them conceptually. And I'm just illustrating this point that, sometimes this conceptual clarity is, strengthens the kind of social actions that we do. But there is a difficulty sometimes in articulating these conceptual challenges. But I do think our awareness of the question of time and our own experience with it, asking the questions to ourselves in terms of our experience, can be quite liberatory in so many ways. Thank you so much for this opportunity.